All right, thank you. Here, I'm going to try not to throw a real softball here. How do you propose to balance the Second Amendment and simultaneously prevent future school shootings?
Carl.
I'm a first again? All right.
Oh, okay.
Art.
Just we're so nice to one another. I jumped into this race days after the shooting in Parkland, Florida. When I heard, and I worked with youth on social justice for 20 years, when I heard youth saying, students saying, adults have failed us, that ripped through my heart. When I watched what they were saying in town hall meetings on CNN to Mark Rubio, I started to feel smaller and smaller, and I needed to get out and fight. So I knew, as a former county commissioner, I knew living in rural Colorado, gun country, that it would be the third rail to talk about banning assault weapons. And so I went out there and I said, I'm for banning assault weapons, I'm for banning fracking, and I'm for impeaching Trump. The things that you'll hear us say, because we've had this question, is all three of us are for all of the restrictions, if it's bump stocks, if it's magazine clip limits and things like this. But this is a serious issue because we've all been to marches with students who are 14 years old. My daughter's 13, my son's 11, and those students are saying, I don't feel safe going to school. In the Vail Valley, in all of the different resort communities, in the rural communities, Grand Junction, I've heard it. This is really scary that we're raising a generation of kids that don't think that we're doing anything about it. This isn't time for studies. This isn't time for thinking about it. I'm pro-gun. I'm anti-militarized assault weapons. And the reason is because we continue to live in a weapons-based economy where we continue to fund endless wars. It trickles down to our police departments. Our police departments are now weaponized like they're the military. They're shooting black men. If it wasn't for smartphones that were finding it, we wouldn't even know that as whites. And then it gets into the hands of kids who have mental health issues. There was another part of that question.
You want me to repeat that again?
No,
You
I've got it, thanks.
In 2013, I proudly voted for Colorado's common sense universal background check bill. I also proudly voted for the magazine limit that cost some people their seats in the Senate and in the House. The NRA was on us all, on me, on all of us Democrats, like a wetsuit in the days leading up to that vote. They were in our offices. So were the gun manufacturers. Don't forget them. They're a major lobbying group. I stood up to the gun manufacturers. I stood up to the NRA. After I made the vote, of course, they had full-page ads in the hometown papers saying that I was against the Constitution and that I wanted to pry their guns out of their civilian citizen hands. Well, that part's not true. Universal background checks are, to me, a no-brainer. That would be the common sense Colorado-based bill that I would introduce. Magazine limits, bans on assault weapons, those are all common sense kinds of gun safety measures. And it's enough is indeed enough. One of the reasons why Blue Rising endorsed me, it's a pack of people who are concerned about environmental issues, women's issues, and gun safety issues. And I had long interviews with them, and they know what my record is. They know that I don't just talk about it, I've done it, and I will do it in the United States Congress. Standing up to the gun manufacturers and the NRA is absolutely critical for any Democratic member of Congress. And I believe that if we look across our district, that there are lots of law-abiding Republicans and unaffiliated who agree with background checks. My first husband, back in Minnesota, was a police officer. I know what it's like for him to go out and face domestic violence and now facing automatic weapons. That is really tough on law enforcement, and it's really tough on business people too. So we need change, and we need it now.
So it was nice, Lauren, to tell you kind of you got through the position. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what my personal frustration is in this debate. So just so you know, I grew up on a ranch. A gun had been a tool my entire life. I carried one as a park ranger. I'm a gun owner now. I've always been a responsible gun owner, hunter, all of those things. But after Parkland, I was cooking dinner and my daughter was across the counter from me. And as parents, you know when you know it's that moment to have those conversations. And so I asked Zoe how she was feeling about everything. And she said, "Dad, I know every exit in every classroom. I know what furniture to pile in front of the door. I know what I can use for a weapon in that room. And I know the exit strategy of all of my friends." So for me, this is about, if I have to have that conversation, it is cowardice for any politician, for Paul Ryan to stand up and say, this conversation is too hard to have. This is not the right time, because if you are a parent, you have had that conversation. And I will tell you, it is a damn hard conversation to have. And we have to have it. So we have to be talking about universal background checks, assault weapons bans, magazine limits, bump stocks. There is no excuse for a politician to stand on the floor of the House and say, this conversation is too hard. That's money. That's cowardice.
Okay, we're going to shift gears here. With the Trump administration attempting to undermine protections for our American public lands, what will you do to ensure the protection? And Dan, why don't we start with you?
I've always been a champion for our public lands and for the environment. That's one of the reasons that Conservation Colorado named me the 2017 Legislator of the Year. I've stood up for public lands in the House along with Senator Donovan, who stood up in the Senate, the state Senate. Scott Tipton is so beholden to oil and gas that he went along with Nathan Chafitz's bill, which would have sold off 93,000 acres of Colorado's public lands to the highest bidder. And guess who that would have been? Groups like SG Interests. SG, of course, was the one that tried to wreck the agreement that Gunnison County, Pitkin County, and Delta County, and lots of folks within those counties put together over a decade. S&G gave him a bill, and the reason we know that is because they were stupid enough to leave their name on it, and he was pushing that bill. We need to point this out to people so that they know exactly what our so-called representative has been doing. Because public lands are not only our heart and soul, it's who we are, but they're also our economy. Our economy on the western slope, our economy in the San Luis Valley, which right now is threatened with drilling right near the Great Sand Dunes, and throughout our state. Recreation is one of the most important pieces of our economy. And one of the things, of course, that brings people for that is our public lands. But they also, our public lands, bring people into our rural communities who have entrepreneurial skills, and they want to be here because it's beautiful, and they want to be near those public lands. There are many outdoor manufacturing businesses, and I worked with one of them for many years, Mood Cycles, out of Steamboat Springs. And groups like that provide jobs. So there are lots of reasons to support public lands, and I will fight for them.
So I don't know if you guys caught the New York Times article about 10 days ago, but there is one place in the United States that public lands are safe. It's Montana. I think it may have something to do with who's the Secretary of the Interior, but I'm not sure. So that's a place we absolutely have to start. There are a number of leadership positions that we have to push back hard on. We have to take whatever action we deem appropriate to remove, push back, protect. That also includes fully funding our agencies, making those decisions, pushing them on science-based decision-making. It may also include taking more and more steps, like you see with the San Juan Wilderness Bill, where Congress has to take the right steps because the agencies are unwilling to do so. Those are the kinds of actions that we absolutely have to take. Because not only in Gunnison County are public lands important, 80% of all the public lands in the state of Colorado are in the 3rd Congressional District. It is part and parcel not only to who we are, but who we're going to become in this district. It is integral to our economic development. And so when you think about public lands, it is a team sport. It is one that ranges from ranchers all the way across to recreationalists who rely on public lands to help make their world work, to provide both economics and that thing in our soul that is so important to all of us that when we walk out there in the woods. So we absolutely have to take any action we can to protect public lands. It's pushing back against this administration, against the president, against the heads of these agencies. It's fighting hard every single day. And it's building that consensus out here in what is a red district, flipping it to blue so that there is a public lands advocate in Congress from the West to stand up for those public lands.
So we have consensus, we all love public lands. We all want to save them, correct? We think it's the golden goose. It's where our economy is generated from, recreation, why people move out here, why we may be here. So there's 4 elements, there's 4 structures that I always try to bring back, and we may not get a question on this, but you have wars for profit, you have to have climate justice, we have to fight inequality gap, and we have to fight racism and racial injustice. So under climate justice, how many people here are for banning fracking? Thank you. So we have a Democratic governor who has fought against banning fracking. I worked with Governor Ritter. He had appointed me to Health and Human Services rulemaking, so I got to meet with him a month ago. And he's not for banning fracking. There's almost, the numbers are different, but let's say 100,000 fracking wells. So in the last month, I've been driving to fracking sites in Paonia and in West Parachute, and I've been interviewing farmers. This affects our water quality, this affects our air quality, yet we have an oil and gas state where the Democrats are either being complicit or helping the leadership in order to have more and more fracking. Fracking is a Ponzi scheme, and they keep giving away more and more of this, and when they opened up exporting of oil and gas to foreign countries, it started to increase even faster. And these are multinational corporations, and one of them on the board of directors is a guy that not many people like, Dick Cheney. And so this is another boom and bust business, but it's affecting our air quality and our water quality, and I would submit you can't call yourself an environmentalist unless you're willing to say you're for banning fracking. Because it's going on our public land.
Along that same vein, let's talk about climate change. This is a question from Nance Grubermeyer. What should the United States Congress do to address climate change? Well, real easy one there.
Skipping around.
Skipping around, I like that. One, we all know what's happening. We all know we're contributing. We know the science is there. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about what do we do about the problem that we are facing today. And that's really what our conversation has to be about. Impacts, outcomes, solution sets. When we start working on this issue, one, we've got to get back into the Paris Climate Accords. Two, we have to work, and this goes back to the tax policy, we have to work to keep moving industry away from a fossil fuel-based economy. We know that there is some period of time it can't be here today, gone tomorrow, but the faster we can make that transition happen, pull those subsidies away from fossil fuel manufacturers, put those into renewable energy. Let's shift that economy. We see companies like Excel already starting to do that, where they're closing Comanche 1 and 2 early in Pueblo. Those are coal-fired stacks. They're replacing that energy component with solar. Those are the kinds of policy changes we need to push forward and help drive on the private side to make a real difference. We have to protect, the most recent from the EPA is that they're going to try to restrict, they're loosening up regulations on cars, trying to restrict California from maintaining stricter enforcement. We absolutely have to push back and protect against that. We're going to have this really interesting 2-year period where we're going to have a Congress, hopefully, that is completely controlled by Democrats and a president that we have to fight against every single day. It's going to have to come from positive, effective, aggressive legislative action to push back against these agencies, because if we don't, you can see the damage that is being done every single day by Pruitt or Zinke on these kinds of issues. And so we have to take quick, hard, aggressive legislative action to push back against this president.
Thanks for putting these two back to back. With an MBA, you think in terms of if you can measure it, you can manage it. So let's measure what do we learn in the Paris Accord. We learned that by 2050, if Celsius goes up by 2%, we're in holy shit territory. We know that that we have the infrastructure in place already to go past that 2 degrees Celsius mark. So what are we seeing happen like last summer with the storms and with the rising sea levels? Within 10 to 20 years, there's going to be rising sea levels of 10 to 20 to 30 feet. That means bye-bye Florida, South Florida. That means Africa. That means parts of South America and other places. What do you get with that? Impacts of climate refugees. So what are we doing? We have the knowledge, and we're trying to go out there and we're talking, well, we're getting, of course I want to stop global warming, but our addiction to oil is what's driving this. And if we don't keep it in the ground, we're not going to get there because the infrastructure is already there. And one of the ways that we have to do it is called leadership. And we have to go to the Democratic leadership. And there's a fight going on inside of the Democratic Party that Bernie, thank God, did a great job in initiating. And that is, where are we going to be with these issues? You can't be a governor of Colorado or a U.S. Senator of Colorado and be for Jordan Cove Pipeline. You can't be for the type of things that are going on right now and say that you're still you want to stop climate change. And then we haven't even, I don't have time to get into the agribusiness and what's that's doing with the methane gas releases. Our lifestyle of capitalism and everybody have a single family home with a white picket fence and a SUV car is not working, folks. And that change has to happen now. I'm going to be dead when the real effects happen, and I'm worried about my children and my children's children. I don't have hope. I have kids, and this is why I'm fighting in this fight.
There are a variety of things we can do almost immediately in January of 2019. First and foremost is infrastructure investment in renewables. And not only do renewables, as we talked about before, create jobs, but renewables move us away from that fossil fuel dependence. And renewables already cost less for the consumer. If we look at our rural electric co-ops and at Excel, we find that the reason they've been shifting is because renewables are cheaper. Back in 2012, when I voted for Senate Bill 252, I did the research, and sure enough, the rural co-ops that relied more, had a larger portfolio of renewables, actually charged less to both retail and business customers. So that's one of the first things we have to do, is invest more and incentivize renewables more. At the same time, we have to remove the fossil fuel subsidies that have been in place since the 1890s. They were there because the industry was new then, and they needed those subsidies to move away from whale oil. Well, guess what? They're not new anymore. So we don't need those subsidies. We also need to look very seriously at a carbon fee. The Citizens Climate Action Coalition has really looked at this issue. There is now a climate caucus in the U.S. House, and I would love to join it. However, for every new person who joins, you have to have one D and one R, so we're waiting. But nonetheless, I support that as a very, very important policy for reducing our greenhouse gas footprint and our carbon footprint. When I was county commissioner, one of the first things I did was put into play measurement of our greenhouse gas emissions so that we could take steps to change them, and we did. And the Colorado House, I voted, along with many others, for specific, concrete, measurable climate goals for the state of Colorado. And that's what we need at the federal level as well. The time is now to do this.
All right, I'm gonna take this into one that I think dovetails nicely. It's regarding campaign finance reform, because I think the oil and gas industry is very invested in our politics, and that's been brought up by just about every candidate. So how do you propose to address the problem of unlimited corporate spending in campaigns? Carl, why don't you take some first?
So in my opening, you heard my commitment to not taking corporate PAC money. I think one of the things as an attorney, I have to tell you, in the history of the modern court, the most disappointing decision that has come out of that court is Citizens United. It is the single greatest threat, I think, to our democracy that we have seen, because it acknowledges or pushes forward the concept that this democracy is for sale. So how do we address that? There are several bills in Congress now that have not gotten out of committee, because you can guess, and that would address limiting and framing Citizens United in such a way that at least there were reporting requirements. We have some very fundamental issues with the way the Constitution is being interpreted right now regarding a person that may mean that a complete flip of Citizens United without a constitutional amendment may be tough, but we can push back in a number of areas, and we absolutely have to do that. But here's the most important place we have to push back as politicians, is that we have to walk the walk if we're going to talk the talk. And that means that each and every one of us has to make that commitment to get corporate money out of their campaigns. They have to make sure that they're not establishing those relationships, because once you establish that relationship, it is hard to extricate yourself from it. That's what we have to do. We have to provide the leadership in what we do as a campaign, in what we do as a politician, regardless of party. We have to be the leaders and make that decision. And I will tell you, it is tough, because it means that hopefully every one of you signed up today on our sign-in sheet so I can call you for a donation later, because it is hard to do this in a grassroots, one person at a time. But that's absolutely what we have to do if we're going to change this system.
This is probably the biggest problem in politics right now, if you really think about it, is, Mark Udall used to be my congressman when I was a commissioner, and then he became our U.S. senator, and he's like, Arn, money is the mother's milk of politics. And I'm not taking special interest money, and from what I've listened to from the other two candidates, none of us are. And so that would say, well, how are you going to win if you don't have money? I think Gail Schwartz raised $1.4 million. I don't know if she was taking special interest money or not. She lost by 14%. Before you jump in a race, you think, well, if you need money in order to win it, she had $1.4 million and she lost by 14%. So what does that mean? How are we going to get Democrats elected? I don't like voting for Democrats that are taking special interest money. I don't like going to Washington, D.C. and being told that the meeting I was going to have with our representative isn't going to happen, and then you find out from one of your friends as a staff person that they're out raising money. They spend 5 hours a day raising money. This isn't me talking. These are representatives who have stopped saying, I can't do this anymore. So I'm for publicly financed campaigns and elections. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm a pessimist on this. If we're going to continue taking special interest money, corporation money, if we see Senator Bennett vote in order to deregulate the banking industry like he did a month ago, and you see that he's raised over $1 million from the finance and banking industry, 2 + 2 = 4 there. So who are we fighting for? Are we fighting for the people, or are we fighting for the corporations? It's clear for me I'm fighting for the people.
We need to end Citizens United, and we need comprehensive campaign finance reform. If you think back to the 70s, post-Watergate, there were strict limitations on what a campaign could spend. Those ended with the 1976 Buckley v. Vallejo case, where multimillionaire Jim Buckley, running for the Senate from New York, went to court and got that overturned. So now any candidate can spend whatever they want. Citizens United, of course, bumped us up an awful lot, particularly in terms of disclosure. The super PACs that were created by Citizens United essentially don't have to report. They report, but they don't report from whom they got the money nor to whom they give it. That's why it's called dark money. But then after Citizens United, we also had McCutcheon. Before McCutcheon, No individual wealthy person could give more than $123,000 to the combination of all the campaigns they supported for the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. That went away. It's unlimited. Money should not be speech. Speech is not money. And in fact, this is at the root of most of our problems. If you look at Tipton, where does he get money from? Wall Street. What committee does he serve on? The House Financial Services Committee, which is the House Banking Committee. He gets the other parts of his money from oil and gas. Interesting. I've taken the no corporate pledge, the no corporate PAC money pledge. I've also taken the no fossil fuel money pledge. My campaign is based on grassroots donors. To date, over 1,100 individual donations, with over 72% of those being $100 or less. That's the way you win a campaign, with grassroots support, and you can beat those corporate PACs anytime.
Okay, we have time for about one or two more here, and then we'll follow that with a 1-minute closing thought from each of the candidates. Here's the next question. What will your priorities be in the United States Congress regarding education? Carl, you want to kick us off again, or you want to switch it up?
Yeah, let's switch it up. I don't
Art?
want to turn it off every time. Okay.
Diane? Somebody.
Doesn't matter.
What would be my free college? Anyone for free college for education? Anyone for having, I told you that I almost was recalled for funding early child care development. And the reason I fought for that is because the investment that you make before the age of 6, not just in preschool or pre-K, but it's also for healthcare, it's also for parental support and needs and helping out there. It's also for special needs children. And it's very, very hard to fund early childhood development, trust me. I went through and still have the lashes for it, because people are thinking that government is now raising the kid, and that's not true. And then in our public school system, I mean, holy Christ, Betsy DeVos. Do you know who her brother is? It helps give a MO of what I'm trying to map out here as a business plan, is Eric Prince. You know, the person who's selling merchants all over the world to different governments. So they're trying to privatize all of our school systems, and one of the ways they're trying to do it is break it down. And where's all the money that we're losing? It's either going away again to privatization, or to cutting taxes, or to the military-industrial complex, or the military-industrial security congressional complex. And I worked with Daniel Ellsberg for 10 days on recently, and so I want to bring in the full definition. So if we're not educating our children, if we're not fighting for the teachers in order to give them greater pay, then we're not fighting for our future. We're not having the type of people that we need for a knowledge-based economy. And I would submit that this is very important. And if the other team is trying to cut that, there's a reason why they're cutting it. And it's not just for business. It's because they're trying to bring us down as people. This is an empire in decline, as I said earlier. This is what they're trying to do, so they have us as indentured servants for the rest of our lives.
Diane, why don't you take this?
Public education, good, well-funded, public education for all is the foundation of democracy. Without public education, we don't have a chance of getting to equal opportunity. So what are some of the specific things that I would do? 1, fund universal preschool. Kids, if they don't have preschool, when they get to kindergarten, are already at a disadvantage. The data for over 40 years show that the return on investment for early childhood education is somewhere between 25 and 27 to 1. We have to do that. But also at the other end, if you will, of that age spectrum, we have to reduce the burden of college student loan debt. And part of doing that is a number of different programs, but part of doing that is holding the private colleges and universities responsible as well. And what I mean by is the for-profit universities. I don't mean regular colleges. Betsy DeVos, she wants to privatize, so does Scott Tipton, so do all the Republicans. We in the Colorado House and Senate vote against that time and time again. Using taxpayer dollars, in my mind, is un-American, and plus being immoral, for private education. So getting to that burden of student loan debt is critical. Now, most education funding K through 12 is, of course, at the local and state level, but there are things we can do at the federal level. One of them, of course, is to reduce testing requirements and evaluation requirements. I visit schools a lot, and I visited schools a lot as a state representative. One kindergarten teacher in the Eagle Valley said to me, "Diane, you saw my classroom all day, you saw what we do," and then she broke down crying and said, "I spend so much of my time on administering these evaluations that I don't have time to teach." And part of that comes from the federal level, and we need to change that.
So public education is a huge passion of mine. You guys may have noticed when you walked in that there is a very detailed 9-point plan on education that I put that out just at the end of last week. I'm not going to go through all of that, but I'd like to talk to you about a couple of really important things that we can do. You will hear oftentimes that there is nothing the federal government can do to help schools. It is a state issue, it's a state funding issue. We could have a long conversation about the impacts of Tabor and how debilitating that is. But what can we do? We can start at the top. The first thing we need to do is remove Betsy DeVos. She clearly doesn't understand education. She doesn't understand public schools, their importance to our communities. She just doesn't get it. But beyond that, what can we actually do? So one of the places where schools are spending an enormous amount of money, and it cuts into other funding that they could do, is the funding for IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. It is an amazing piece of legislation that ensures that every child gets access to the classroom. And I have a family where that was important and that we could take advantage of that. But the reality is only about a third of the cost of providing those services in the classroom is reimbursed between the federal and state governments. School districts today are spending 40 to 60% of their operating funds to meet the requirements of the IDEA. We have to fully fund that. That would make a tremendous and dramatic impact to fund that mandate in our classrooms. The other really exciting thing that I want to talk about is how do we address the teacher shortage, which is the other issue we have in public education. And out here in rural districts, we struggle a great deal with keeping teachers. So it's the 4 for 6 plan, which really comes from what my son is in ROTC. It's that basic concept. We will give you 4 years of a scholarship to a public university if you give us 6 years, commit to 6 years of teaching in a rural or disadvantaged district. The importance of those 6 years are the first 3, you learn to be a great teacher. So often we lose those in rural America or disadvantaged districts at that point. But with this program, we get another 3 years where they're really hitting their stride. So let's keep pushing public education forward. It is the critical thing to do.
All right. We're close out of time here. We all have some very difficult decisions to make in June when we get our primary ballot. I think that's obvious today. But I'd like if you guys could just each leave us with a closing thought. Just 1 minute, please. We'll start with Arn, Diane, and Kyle.
1 minute thought. Vote for me. A couple years ago, we couldn't talk about banning assault weapons. A few years ago, we couldn't talk about what is happening with capitalism. We couldn't say we live in an oligarchy. Thank God Princeton can now prove for us that we live in an oligarchy. So when you live in an oligarchy and you're running for a federal position, you're thinking of who's got the most amount of money and having the most amount of influence, and how, as an activist candidate, do you bring attention to it? Or my favorite line is, how do I turn on the lights and make the cockroaches run as a leader so people start talking about it and preach to the choir and make the choir sing? How do you get them inspired? You talk about what are the main issues. If we live in an oligarchy and you look at where most of the money is going, as I've tried to lay out in the last hour, you start to fight those things, and then you start to bring it to the people and explain how that affects you in your everyday life, and how that affects your children, and how that affects your grandchildren. And I would say we're in a state of emergency right now. That's why I'm in this race. My hair is on fire and I'm looking for water, and I'm not asking for your vote. I'm asking for you to fight. Stop killing innocent people in the Middle East. Stop with the inequality, stop with the racial injustice. We all have to believe in Black Lives Matters and talk about things that we were afraid to talk about before.
I grew up in a single-parent, female-headed household. Back then, they didn't have that word. And so my mother worked her fingers to the bone every day, and I knew what a payday loan was. But when she came home, she volunteered for the community. And she spent a lot of her, quote, free time volunteering. She taught me that all of us, each of us, has a responsibility to make the world better. That's why we're here. And everybody does it in a different way. I started as a citizen activist, working on peace, on the environment, on women's issues, and on social justice. Then I became a county commissioner, working on land and water. As a county commissioner, promulgated and got accepted the strictest water quality pre-testing, post-testing, and monitoring procedure for oil and gas. Then I ran for the state house and won 3 times. And I told you earlier how I will beat Scott Tipton. By listening, that's what a representative does, you listen. But you also have to be a bit of a policy wonk, and you have to know where to go to get the advice about how to turn those issues and those concerns of your constituents into policy that can work. And part of that is, of course, working across the aisle. That's who I am, that's what I've done, that's why I've been endorsed by Progressive Democrats of America, by the AFL-CIO, by Blue Rising, and by our own Barbara McLaughlin, as well as many other people and groups. I ask for your support, and I would be so honored to have your help. And together, we will beat Scott Tipton.
So you've heard a lot about policy, you've heard a little bit about my campaign. I'm gonna give you a minute about my family because that defines me more than anything. And that's from my wife, who started a nonprofit with me. We work with kids with autism and veterans with PTSD. To my stepson, Mark, who commissions next Friday into the Air Force down at CSU. He has been selected for Special Forces. He will spend his career serving this nation and his community, embedded with Ranger teams and SEAL teams. To my daughter, Zoe, who's finding her voice as a young activist, who spoke at the Women's March in Pueblo and also spoke here at the Crested Butte March, if you guys remember her, if you were there. And to my young son, on the day that I walked out and stood with my daughter in honor of Parkland when she walked out of her high school, to my young son, who was 14, who, when I got home that night, said, "Hey Dad, by the way, I organized a walkout at the middle school today." And I asked him how that went, and he said, "Well, they told me I was too young to do it without asking permission," and I know my son, so I asked how that went. And he said, "I just looked at him and said, it's not civil disobedience if I ask permission." The reason I say those things is because they define who I am and who we are and what this campaign is about. It is about each and every one of us. It is about pushing forward on the issues that matter to us. All of that having been said, I'm going to close with a question, and it's the most important one we have, which is, are we ready to win this election?
Yeah.
A little bit louder, are we ready to win the election? All right, let's get to work.
All right. I think I speak on behalf of all of us saying that I'm honored to have all 3 of you as our potential representative. How about a big round of applause for our